Diversity and inclusion to me means people, human beings from all walks of life. Doesn't matter if it's around gender, if it's around your political views, if it's around where you were born or where you're moving to, that people with all the richness of differences that they bring, that we all bring as human beings, have an opportunity to be heard and to be included. And that in any environment you're in, you have at least one person you feel like you can be yourself with. Now, the optimal, definition of inclusion is that you feel you can be yourself with every single person. Realistically, that takes time, especially inside of organizations. But as a start, we'd like for people to feel comfortable to be themselves with at least one individual. And really, as you think about it, you want people to feel the same way you would if you were having a guest over, right? You want them to feel welcome. You want them to feel safe. You want them to feel like part of the family. And so that's how I see inclusion playing itself out. I mean, you could really call it empathy and replace diversity and inclusion with just that one word. It undergirds every single thing that diversity and inclusion is really based on. And empathy, is tough, right? What I'm hoping we'll see are more people in the AI and kind of VR worlds as that becomes more and more popular, really pushing the boundaries to have other human beings experience what it might be like to be in the minority, however you describe that. But empathy is a really tough thing because it's really hard if you haven't gone through the experience on your own to really understand what someone else may be going through. And so one of the things that we try to do when we talk about humanizing diversity and inclusion, especially at eBay, is to get people simply to connect on a time when they felt excluded. We all have at least felt excluded at least one time in our lives. And so whether it's because of your weight or because you weren't popular or because you moved from a different part of the world and were a minority in a new country, we've all felt it before. And if we can simply just connect there, that's the kind of empathy that really provides the foundation for understanding in the longer term. They can start by having a conversation. A diversity strategy is great. I think strategies are great for the longer term, but you can start simply back to what you mentioned around empathy. You can start by trying to think about if you are in the majority, however you define that, what might it feel like to actually be an outsider? What might it feel like to be new to the company? And actually do that, but really drive that conversation across your company. So a couple of more tactical things you can do. But I want to be clear, starting with the mindset of we don't have an answer to this. This is a long-term, multi-year approach, and it's going to be iterative. And by the way, no company, as great as I believe eBay is, we haven't solved this problem, right? It's something that we're working on over time. And so if you take that approach as a start, more tactically, one of the things you can do is you can push out a survey to your people and actually ask them, how do they define diversity and inclusion? A lot of times companies, we feel like we know, we read literature on it, and we say, okay, these must be the categories. But in many times, we're surprised when we actually have that conversation with our folks, whether it's through live conversations or through surveys. So that's one clear way you can do it. Another thing that companies have to do is they have to understand where their leaders are as it pertains to diversity and inclusion. Again, this is a shameless plug, but I'm okay to do it because it's very authentic. Our CEO, Devin Wenig, is the person who founded my role. My role is only 11 months old. He created it. And when I interviewed with him and with other leaders at the company, it was very clear to me that this wasn't a, hi, you're the chief diversity officer. Now that you're here, we're going to go back to doing things that are important for the company. At every single step of the way, leadership must be involved. They've got to be right there on the front line when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And the last thing I would say is, for any company that's really serious about this, you've got to put dollars behind this. You have to put human capital behind this. And it can't just be the people in HR. It can't just be the people who normally self-select into diversity and inclusion related topics. You have to have a representative group of individuals from across the company, across functions, across demographics, actually getting this thing started. talent retention, I mean, just think about it. You know, we just had a great conversation with the HRD Summit Europe, and one of the things that came up when we asked people, tell us about a time when you felt excluded, was someone talking about being at a company that they really liked, a new person joined their group, and then all of a sudden that person who was in a position of power was very exclusive to them in a really, really overt way. And that person talked about over time waking up and being quote unquote bummed to go to work. Think about what that means for productivity. Think about a workforce where you're in a certain group and you show up to a meeting, and every single day you have a team meeting and you're the only woman who is in that meeting. Think about that individual. Think about the person who shows up and they're the only ethnic minority, or they're the only person who may be from a religious background that isn't popular across that organization. Imagine the baggage that they carry and the self-doubt that they may have, while you just want them to show up and be as productive and innovative as possible. Removing these kinds of barriers and constraints from people by creating super authentically inclusive workforces, it unlocks the potential for innovation and the drive that we all need to push our companies forward. And it also keeps people there. And we all know that in order for us to do a better job at companies, we need to keep and retain great talent. And so retention is really one of the major outcomes of paying attention to diversity and inclusion. And then the other question was around leveraging it. I mean, it leverages not just with retention, but also across talent acquisition, also across your marketplace. If you think about the customers you have today, and are you being inclusive of them, all the way to the customers that you need for tomorrow in order to help drive the bottom line. Diversity and inclusion, it's not a nice to have, it's a business imperative. Couple of reasons. I'll tell you why I joined this summit in particular, with it being based in Europe. One of the things when I started as Chief Diversity Officer at eBay, I said, this is not just going to be a US-centric conversation. Oftentimes, the US has been the loudest about this, and in many cases, I definitely understand that. Look, I was born in the United States, I love the US, but eBay's employee group is half of us are outside of the US. And so in order for us to move beyond lip service of, hey, this is going to be a really global strategy, I've got to show up. And so while I'm here, I'm spending time with my colleagues who are based in our Amsterdam office. I'm spending time with our colleagues who are based in our Berlin office. And so I also wanted to come specifically to this summit because I knew that it would bring together some of the top leaders from across Europe, in particular, who were in the area of human resources. And I wanted to push this narrative around humanizing diversity and inclusion to see, does it actually work here? Is this something that resonates? I also just wanted to learn from my colleagues here. I wanted to understand what diversity and inclusion means across the countries within Europe. And I did just that. And I think HRD and this summit provided a great way to tap into a captive audience of really talented folks who are on the forefront of leadership in HR, especially in Europe, and to learn. And so I would tell anybody, definitely come to these summits, but make sure that you're getting beyond the surface level stuff. We come to summits oftentimes and we just have these top level conversations. We exchange a business card. We don't really get to know each other. We don't really ask the tough questions. As quickly as you can, especially at HRD summits, where you've got such a rich crop of talent, make sure you're getting beyond all the BS and get to know the human being and really push to get the answers that are going to help you to be a better leader when you go back to your organizations. So it's been a great pleasure to be here.